As I said earlier, it's really good to see all of you guys out tonight. There is just going to be a really awesome opportunity for us just to really focus on what took place in 2021. We really appreciate you coming out for just to give your support and helping us to pause and remember that day, January 6th, 2021, and to be joining us in this unrelenting resolve to remember that day, but not just remember, but to determine to take action and to get more of our people to the voting booth this year, 2022. Now we have an agenda tonight. It will be moderated to keep us on track, and we're going to be aware of the time. The event is scheduled for 90 minutes. And like already, it's been recorded. We will take a group photo at some point in time. We'll notify you when that's going to happen. And I saw posters in the window already. So if you have your posters ready for the window, that will be awesome. We don't have candles. You guys might have candles in your house you want to use, but you're welcome to use the light on your phone too, and just kind of darken the lights in your room, and that would be great. There will be a couple specific calls to action during the process of this vigil tonight, and we'll ask you to participate, but they'll just be ones that we will want to participate in together collectively anyway. The chat will be disabled for the duration of this event because we really want us to focus on what took place and not have any kind of other information that's inserted in what we're trying to do tonight. So the chat will be disabled, and we're asking all you guys to please remain on mute. And there will be time for Q&A of our speakers tonight, but not during the time that they're speaking, because it's going to be like a roundtable discussion. And they will be, the speakers in our roundtable discussion group will be asked certain questions by the moderator. At this time, it is my honor to introduce to you our moderator. His name is Jaden Jefferson. From Toledo, Ohio. Jaden Jefferson is a multimedia reporter. He is part of our major part of our anti-racist Jubilee Symposia, and he's 13 years old. It is my pleasure to introduce to you this young man, Jayden Jefferson. Take it away, Jayden.
It is my pleasure to be here tonight. Thank you guys for coming. I want to first start by introducing our first group of speakers. So our first group tonight we have is Mushtaq Darabu, who is a community member representing the Muslim community in Crystal Lake, Illinois. And then we have Dianne Pulsipher, I'm sorry for butchering that, out of Houston, Texas. So the question I have for you guys tonight is, why are we here?
No matter our color, background, or party, most of us believe that people who betray our nation and endanger our lives have no business governing in our name. And as you all know, on January 6th, a year ago today, armed right-wing militants attacked our Capitol and tried to overturn the results of the 2020 election. And a faction of elected officials turned their backs on America by trying to block an investigation to cover up their role in this deadly violence. January 6th was a violent and deadly attack against all Americans, against our country, our democracy, and our freedom as voters to choose the leaders that represent us so that we have a government of, by, and for the people. The attacks continue. 1 year later, the same faction that attacked our country on January 6th is hard at work silencing our voices by restricting our freedom to vote, attacking fair voting districts, and quietly preparing future attempts to sabotage free and fair elections, and with it our democracy. And I have just watched in dismay as that's been happening here in Texas. Mounting evidence shows that some elected leaders aided in planning January 6th. These same lawmakers are continuing to spread daily lies about the validity of the 2020 election to keep their supporters engaged and enraged, which has led to continued death threats and violence against public officials and private citizens.
The important investigative work of the January 6th Select Committee must continue so that our elected officials and the public understand what really happened on January 6th and prevent future such attacks on the peaceful transfer of power. The work of the committee has been fast and effective to date. The January 6th Select Committee has pursued hundreds of interviews, reviewed thousands of pages of documents, and held witnesses refusing to cooperate with its investigation in criminal contempt. The work of the committee has been fast, effective to date, and must continue. So this January 6th, exactly 1 year later, Americans across race, place, party, and background are holding candlelight vigils to say, in America, the voters decide the outcome of elections. The promise of democracy is not a partisan issue, but a calling that unites us all as Americans. To prevent this kind of attack from happening again, our elected leaders must pass urgent legislation that will protect this country from anti-democratic forces who are continuing their efforts to destroy it. The January 6th attack by right-wing militants demonstrates the dangers facing our nation and only further underscores the urgency with which we need to transform our political system into one that works for all Americans. Thank you.
We will now begin our call to remembrance and action through a candlelight/phone vigil as we reflect really on this day in American history that none of us are going to forget. So we encourage you now to take a moment of silence to remember the people who were injured and died defending our Capitol, to remember how close the attempted coup came to succeeding in stopping the counting of the votes, hurting or even killing some of our elected leaders, and how it created long-term trauma for those working and living in the Capitol, as well as the millions of Americans across the country who watched how close our American democracy came. Of course, our American democracy came to ending that day. Thank you. We're now going to introduce some of our panelists and begin the roundtable discussion. I start with Congressman Sean Casten of Illinois' 6th Congressional District, Jaden Jefferson, my father, out of Toledo, Ohio, and of course, Mushtaq Darabu, the Muslim community member out of Crystal Lake, and Suzanne Parker, a professional educator out of Atlanta, Georgia. I'm going to first start out with this quote before we begin our discussion. The late Congressman John Lewis once said, "Ours is not the struggle of one day, 1 week, or 1 year. Ours is not the struggle of one judicial appointment or presidential term. Ours is the struggle of a lifetime, or maybe even many lifetimes. And each of us in every generation must do our part." And that was Lewis on the movement building in Across That Bridge, a vision for our change and future of America. So I would like to first have all of our guest speakers here introduce themselves.
Hello, Jaden. Sean Casten here. Nice to see you. Nice to see you all.
Good evening, everybody. I'm James Jefferson out of Toledo, Ohio, and it's a pleasure to be on this call with everyone.
Hello, I'm Suzanne Parker from Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm happy to be part of this roundtable discussion.
We can carry on, Jaden.
Okay. Let's move on to the first question for tonight's roundtable discussion was about the Freedom to Vote Act. And I want to pose this question to anyone who's interested in answering it. And it's that, why is this act important?
I'll take a crack at it, Jaden. So the John Lewis Freedom to Vote Act, we call it H.R. 4 in the House because the Senate doesn't pass legislation. We just do that in the House. So they always have House numbers on them. It's only a little bit of a joke. This is a direct reaction to the Shelby versus Holder decision. The Voting Rights Act of 1964, correct me if I've got that year a little bit off, basically said that if you have historic violations disenfranchising people, particularly minorities, that the federal government will step in and oversee your elections, because the way our Constitution is set up, states are responsible for elections. But if you have a pattern of disenfranchisement, federal government has to step in. The decision in Shelby versus Holder essentially gutted the Voting Rights Act by saying that because the conditions under which it was looked back to 1964, that in the opinion of the Supreme Court, I happen to disagree, but it was the opinion of the court, that the conditions had sufficiently changed that that was no longer an appropriate legal test. And so what we did in H.R. 4 was to try to keep as much of the principles of the Voting Rights Act in place, but to create a rolling look back that says, rather than always look back to the conditions in 1964, we will look back to, and I don't quote me on this, I think it's a 15-year look back. I might be a little bit wrong on that, but it's a rolling over time. It's worth keeping in mind that since the Shelby versus Holder decision, all those states that used to be subject to pre-clearance, which is the legal term for the federal government having the right to step in and oversee, almost all of them have gone backwards, and they are primarily the states of the Old South, but not exclusively. And so there's a real need for it there. We passed that in the House in the last Congress. We passed it again in this Congress. Full disclosure, we did weaken it a bit in this Congress because with the changing composition of the Supreme Court, we were very sensitive to trying to make sure this would stand up to legal defenses. So it's not quite as strong as it was before, but it's critical to get passed, because if you believe that we live in a country where everybody has the right to vote, you better make sure that everybody has access to the ballot box. And the truth is, we know that we've never quite lived up to that. Even in 2020, this is an amazing statistic. 2020, the average white person in America had a 6-minute wait to vote. The average Black person in America had a 50-minute wait to vote. That's the reality of the country we live in, and it's intentional, right? And so that's what we're trying to fix.
As you mentioned, our country hasn't lived up to that in many ways, but if I had to name all the ways, it would take way too long. But there's a second part to this, and that is the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. So what would you say is the importance of it? Of course, you have the Freedom to Vote Act, but obviously it did not ensure that everyone was protected. So what does the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act do?
Well, I think, and I want to be careful not to mix my words, the HR 4 that I just described, we renamed the John Lewis Voting Rights Act after his demise. That there's a separate bill, which is HR 1, which went through the Senate, which I think is what you're referring to, that John actually had played a significant role in writing as well. But this is a separate bill, which is essentially, somebody described HR 1 as being the tool to put out the fire, and HR 4 is the tool to summon the fire trucks. And so what's in that HR 1 bill is things like unilaterally getting rid of gerrymandering, creating public financing of elections so that we don't have campaign finance improprieties, undoing some of the Citizens United decisions, a whole series of ethics reforms, basically a lot of good government to try to make sure that our government is as democratic as possible. That bill was taken, again, we passed this in the 116th Congress, we passed again in the 117th. Senator Manchin believed that he could get that through the Senate without changing the filibuster rules if he made some modifications. And so they turned that into S1, which has some minor changes. I will leave this without comment that it got rid of the public financing of elections for senators, but kept it for House members. You can draw your own conclusion about that. After they made those changes, they succeeded in getting 0 Republicans to sign onto it. So that bill is now still not passed in the Senate, but I think we're hopeful that since Senator Manchin now feels some ownership around that bill, that he will be open to changes in the filibuster rules. And you've heard Majority Leader Schumer talk a bit about this, but the spirit of what they're talking about is not a complete elimination of the filibuster, which I've been advocating for a long time, but something that would say you can't allow a minority to block the ability of the majority to have their vote heard in an election. Now we'll figure out exactly how that gets worded, but the idea is that you would change the filibuster rules to not apply to issues around voting rights and election integrity. We'll see, though. I mean, we've been trying to get rid of the filibuster for a long time. I say this, and it's also not a very funny joke, but the United States Senate is committed to making sure that our children and our children's children are given a safer, cleaner, more robust filibuster than the one they inherited from their parents. That's not how I would prioritize, but that's what the Senate has been prioritizing.
It's important that a lot of the work that's being done is also being done on the ground. So what are some ways that people can get involved in? Anyone can ask this or answer this question. Of course, you can, advocate locally, but what are some ways of doing that?
Well, I think definitely, I'm on mute.
Yeah, he's on mute.
Okay. I know I am a UAW or proud UAW member, as in my title. And one of the things that we do, I've learned years and years and years ago that the bread box is connected to the ballot box. So we have cap funds that a lot of our members donate every month to support different candidates that have our best interests at heart. And I'm sure most of you guys know that they're overwhelmingly democratic. The people that work I'm in the auto industry, work for Stellantis or the old Chrysler as it is. We've been 4 or 5 names since I've been there. But I think definitely supporting the candidates and being involved with issues like this. I was actually telling some friends at work later on today, I'm really passionate about the work that you guys are doing. And unfortunately, I'm a 6 or 7 day a week, 10-hour-a-day guy. But right now, other than things like this, I don't have a lot of time to commit to this. But we do have some funds that we can commit to this. And luckily, I'm real close to retirement, and I'll be able to dedicate more time to that once I do retire. And I'm looking forward to it.
Well, one way that people get involved is through organizations like Move On, like NAACP, where you do a lot of phone banking. I've done a lot of phone banking with Move On, as well as texting with NAACP. And there are other groups where you could reach out to the community. I think postcards are an awesome way, like we did in the last election, to reach out to people. I had a very enlightening experience with the last two elections, since I live in Georgia. So we not only was a state that turned blue, but we also sent 2 Democratic senators to Washington, Warnock and Ossoff. And one thing that I really felt encouraged, that people felt empowered in this last election. They felt very much empowered when we reach out and talk to them. They were very concerned about their vote. We cannot lose that momentum. And that's why the John Lewis Voting Rights Act is so important to me, especially living here in Georgia, because I have seen firsthand, we've had a local election a couple of months ago when we were voting for our mayors. And people, gerrymandering has already hit my county, where people who were able to vote in the last few elections all of a sudden can't vote, and they were running around the 3 precincts. So it's very important to reach out to the people, but in order for people to feel empowered and motivated, it's very important to pass these 2 pieces of voter rights legislation.
Usually when there are changes proposed or reforms proposed, it usually comes with opposition. Why would you think that people would want to, or lawmakers would want to oppose some of these acts, the lawmakers that aren't in favor of voter reform? Why do you think that is? And what do you think is the best way to get through to them, just the importance of these acts?
Anybody? I think it's about power. I mean, it's just the bottom line. It's about power. It's about, and that's a whole nother discussion, but it's about caste. People, so the people who are in power, who want to hold on to power, tell you the truth, if they succeed, they will benefit the most under another system. It's the base that doesn't understand that they're going to lose. So they don't want to share because of power and because of a caste system that exists in the United States. But then my question to them is, if you overthrow democracy, what are you replacing it with? And that is what the majority of the people don't understand. And that's a question that needs to be posed.
Yeah, I think Suzanne's exactly right. And look, on this anniversary of January 6th, we are at a moment in our history where it's not lost on anybody that there were only 2 members of the Republican Party who even bothered to show up on Capitol Hill for the Memorial Day, Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney. The rest of the party wasn't even there, because the rest of the party is committed to the idea that if you don't like the outcome of a free and fair election, it's okay to storm the Capitol and try to overturn it. That is treasonous.
Yes,
right?
it is. Yes, it is.
And there's always been that tension in our society, not just on racial lines, right? I mean, there's always been people who have said, I want to be in government because I want to accomplish certain things. And if you agree with those things, you might think that's great. There's also always been people in government who've said, I want to be here because I want to do what the people want me to do. And there's a balance that's there, right? As I tell folks in the 6th district all the time, if all you become Nazis, I'm not going to be a good representative for you. But that tension within a democracy, it's innate to a democracy. Do you think your government's job is to represent your opinions? Or do you think that your government is to represent the opinion of the majority? And to the extent that your opinions are not shared by the majority, you can modulate your views, you can get the hell out of the way, or you can try to topple our democracy. And that last door is a little too ascendant right now, but that's the reason why the folks are opposing this. As a friend of mine from high school once said, Martin Luther King's dream, as it gets realized, is a nightmare for white men of low character.
Wow. I think that I also feel that racism, this whole race thing, is a distraction for toppling a democracy. I did my research, because I had to reacquaint myself with the definitions of, of course I know about fascism, but they're always yelling about fascism, anti-fascism, but they don't understand that their machine is working overtime to put fascism in place, because fascism is a political movement that embraces the far right nationalism and forceful suppression of any opposition. That is what we saw last January 6th, and that's what we continue to see with the threatening of election workers, and the changing of the laws. People don't understand. I think that if we had a government lesson, and let's have a vocabulary lesson, Marxism, knowing what a democratic socialist is and social democrats, I think that if they could only step back and say, wait a minute, I don't want Marxism. They don't want Marxism. They don't want socialism. They don't want fascism. They don't understand that's not what they want. What they want is a democracy, but they have to understand that it's okay to share. It is okay to share. But I think that if they understood what Marxism is, if they understood what fascism is, and we've never had a truly communist country, because no country ever took care of everybody within their country, I think that they would understand democracy is the only government they should want to have. Who wants to give up their property? Who wants to give up their money? Who wants, they talk about losing freedom, but they don't understand what losing freedom really means. So that's why what I mean, Senator, Representative Casten, when I say that I think race is a distraction to get a uglier agenda in place.
Looking at this from the perspective of a journalist, something that's often overlooked, that played a major role in the insurrection was misinformation and what people were saying on their social media feeds, their Facebook feeds. That definitely hyped up and built up this tension before the insurrection, and it definitely put a lot of people in the Capitol that shouldn't have been there that day. So what do you think is the best way to combat misinformation? And where are some things that you've come across while in your social media feed that, was misinformation?
So go ahead, Suzanne.
No, I'm gonna let you speak.
Okay. Well, we've spent a fair amount of time on this issue on the Financial Services Committee and elsewhere. The basic problem is the algorithms that social media uses. And it's important to understand them and how they impact you. They are designed to drive up engagement. And what they've found is that if they can feed you things that you are likely to linger on the side a little longer, they make more money, and then they can sell your data to other people. What that means is they're going to feed you things that echo the things that you've already seen, and you get deeper and deeper in echo chambers and rabbit holes. So individually, that means that until we change that, if you find yourself seeing something on social media that you say, I really agree with this, that's when your spidey sense needs to get real tingly. You need to think twice before you share it. You need to think twice before you go down that further rabbit hole, because you can get there really quick. If you want to do a horrible exercise, go on YouTube and type in some kind of dog whistle that you know politicians use when they're trying to say something you don't want. Follow 3 links. You will soon be in the most hateful, despicable stuff that you've ever seen. And as some of the people who've briefed us in Congress have said, that these algorithms exist to turn dog whistles into rabbit holes. Facebook found that, this is Facebook's own research, that more than 60% of the people who joined white supremacist hate groups on Facebook joined at the recommendation of Facebook's algorithm. And the analogy that one of the people who briefed us one of these hearings said was, you can't confuse freedom of speech with freedom of reach. If you put an ad in your local newspaper, with hateful white supremacy, and it was just a classified ad, right? It'd show up, it'd maybe disappear. I don't know, maybe you get some kook that calls you up, but that would be kind of the end of it. Now imagine that you put that ad in your newspaper, and the next day your newspaper said, I'm going to change the headline on your paper because I saw that you kind of like this, and I'm going to shade the meaning of this to give you some dog whistles that respond to that. And now I'm going to introduce you to somebody who 2 years ago posted a very similar classified ad, and I'm going to encourage you guys meet up in real life. That's exactly what those algorithms do. And we have a regulatory responsibility, I think, to fix some of that. And it's not just about hate groups. It's the same thing, Robin Hood, we had a young man in Naperville who took his life because he went down a rabbit hole. They're applying the same tools that are these things designed to get you addicted and go deeper and deeper into these chains. And so I think we have to, from a regulatory perspective, we have to make some decisions about how to hold the companies responsible for these algorithms. But as an individual, you need to make sure that if you're in a room in real life or on the internet where everybody agrees with you, get the hell out of that room, because you're not going to learn anything there.
Third time's a charm. It's definitely important to challenge yourself and your thoughts politically. It's a good point to make that, of course, if you are on social media, it's definitely a good idea to double check what you're hearing. Now, talking about democracy, because it's definitely the main theme of it, and January 6th definitely wasn't a day that made our democracy look like a democracy. So what would you say are the best ways to ensure that every voice is heard? And obviously we talked about the activism, but what things should our leaders in Washington be keeping in mind when they're making any decision that affects everyone?
I've been talking too much. I'll let some of the others take the lead on that.
I want them to ask themselves, why am I here? I've become frustrated as a voter, as someone who worked very hard in the last 2 elections. I want to see action. I don't want the fighting to happen that's going on, this back and forth, but I want them to think about, why did they run? What are we expecting from them? I feel that as a voter, as an activist, we voted for the Democrats because we needed people to protect and save democracy. And that's what they need to focus on. And they don't need to lose sight of that focus. That's what I want them to do, to think about all that was said in the last election. And they are working. Some things, good things have happened, but we need to see more action. I think that's what happened with the election in Virginia, that, people became complacent. And I think it was a wake-up call, because after that, then they passed the Build Back Better infrastructure part of the legislation. So I think that they have to keep the focus on the goal of why they're there.
I'm going to make a historical observation. This job turns you into a historian because you find yourself thinking about people who had it before. There are things that we can do in government. There are things that we should do in government, and it always takes longer to build things than to break things. And it's always frustrating to be aware of that, right? And you never get done as much as you'd like to. And I'm not making excuses for anybody, but there's a grand total of 537 people who hold federally elected office in the United States. And if 330 million people are sitting around saying, I'm counting on you to fix everything, we're not taking enough agency for our own actions. And that's not, I'm not criticizing people, but James Madison had this, and I was just reading this at a vigil I went to for January 6th earlier. When James Madison was making the case for why people should support the Constitution, he had this is going to sound like he's opposing the Constitution, but he said, a mere demarcation on parchment is not a sufficient guard against those encroachments that lead to tyranny. Counting on a piece of paper to protect you, you're kind of misunderstanding it. What's made us, great and totally unique about America is that we came up with this idea that instead of being led by people who claim to be gods or, had better blood or better genes than the rest of us, we just be governed by the rule of law. and even a schmo like me could get to be a member of Congress. That's a really fragile idea, right? And the minute we stop defending that is when it falls apart. And, and so I think I can't guarantee that if we all work to protect our democracy, we're going to save it. But I can absolutely guarantee that if we give up, we're going to lose it.
Politically or whatever, I always think to myself, can I go home and face my family with the decision that I made? And I had this conversation all the time. I had a conversation with her past person when the other president was in office, and I questioned him on, he was just having a newborn baby girl. And I said, would you say that the current president would be a role model to your baby girl? And his angle was, well, he got to be president, so yeah, I would. And of course, that started a tirade of conversation. But for me, I tell people, I can't come home and look my children in the face that I've been preaching to all of my life about being good people and doing right and all of these things, knowing that I'm doing something totally different behind the scenes, and I believe in calling out, respectfully, people. If we have difference of opinion, let's debate it. You can educate me, sway me. And the example that I give, and I even gave this today, I said, my wife, I said, the mother of my children, the love of my life, the woman I share my household, my bed, my job, everything. I said, my soulmate, my helpmate. I said, when we disagree, I let her know. So I think if I could do that for my wife or my spouse, I can do that for my elected official or anybody else. So I think if the people in Washington kind of, wrap their heads around that, have to go back to their districts or, and explain that. I mean, and I'm kind of naive because I see the good in everybody. And I just don't believe for a second that they actually believe some of the things that I consider tomfoolery, and think that it's right. I just don't believe that when a 12 or 13-year-old kid can figure it out. I'm pretty sure 50, 60-plus-year-old people can figure it out as well.
For sure, for sure. And in a democracy, go ahead.
No, I was going to say one of the ways that I think is easy to figure out what you think of my colleagues is just ask yourself, if they got laid off tomorrow and they showed up at your house and asked for a job, would you hire them? Right? Because there's some of them that if they showed up and said, hey, I'm looking for a babysitting gig, you'd be like, you're a creep. I don't want you anywhere near here, right?
Won't be buying their children's books.
There are other ones who you think like, how could someone of all your talents, why are you doing this? And I think sort of it's an easy lens, but you quickly realize who is at the greatest job they will ever get in their life. And they're the ones to be concerned about because it's all downhill from there.
And elected officials are supposed to work for the voters. That's what the voters put them there. So it's important. And when they did that, the voters, of course, they were making sure that their voice was heard when they go to the ballot box. But in Washington, D.C., there are 700,000 Americans who lack equal voting rights to their peers across the country. So what are your thoughts on that?
And make DC a state. That's a pretty easy question. I remember I was talking with Senator Durbin before the last election and said, what happens if you may recall the polls were a little better than we thought they were going to be, than they turned out to be. But we were saying, all right, if we get big majorities in the Senate and the House, what should we do? And I said, it's easy. Make DC a state, make Puerto Rico a state, pass HR 1, get rid of the filibuster, drop the mic and tell everybody when you're ready to eat at the big kids table, you can come back. But in the meantime, we got some democracy to do. I still believe it.
Hey, Jayden, you know what? This might be a good time to transition to making the calls to the senators since you're talking about Senator Durbin.
Yes. So we do have our call for action today, and I want to take everyone to take this action. Let's call our senators today and every day. So in order to keep the Freedom to Vote Act as a priority, along with the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, Protecting Our Democracy Act, DC statehood, and ending the filibuster, the Senate must, of course, take action. They need to hear from the voters each and every day. So calling your senator takes about 2 minutes. It's an easy way to take action. Schedule a time in your calendar, maybe at lunchtime, and save that number and to make your voice heard. It's something that all of us could benefit from. Of course, tell them your name, town, and how to reach you. 202-224-3121, 202-224-3121. So
Can I just share an updated number that just came in? I'm sorry about that, Jaden. They're asking people to call like right now, that the organizers are asking people to call right now. And that number is 833-345-2551. And they want us to call right now. So if you guys would do that, sorry about that, Jaden. I didn't mean to interfere in your leadership here, but
no problem.
833-345-2551. And what they're asking you to do is to talk, tell your senators everything that the panel's been talking about tonight, like protecting our democracy, DC statehood, the Freedom to Vote Act, and the John Lewis Advancement Voting Rights Act too. So when you're calling your senator in just like right now in a few minutes, go in and share everything with them. And they're asking us to remind you guys to say your name, the town you're calling from, and leave your phone number. Okay. And they know that they're expecting us to call because there are like 250, 300 something actions going on tonight, and every one of us are being asked to call. So I'll repeat that number again, 833-345-2551. And Jaden's already given you a time frame. If you can do that just tonight, like the next 2 or 3 minutes, we'll put you on, you're already on mute, and just make your phone call. Thank you, Jaden.
Thank you.
So Jaden, I guess the next step would be taking questions from the audience until about 7:15, then we have another action.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going through, looking through. I was like, we got a lot done in a short period of time.
Okay, great, awesome. Whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure everybody was done with their call. I didn't want to butt in. All righty. So now that it's, I want to first enter into our call to action. So we're asking that you all take responsibility within your power, of course, to be sure that your friends and their friends and their friends are registered to vote and that all of their information is up to date. So we do have a link that you can use, and it's a site that has everything you and your friends need to check your voter registration and all that other crucial information. I think we can maybe get that in the chat just so you have it. And the website is voteamerica.com/voter registration. So now we're going to take some questions from our audience.
You guys can unmute yourselves if you have a question, or just use the little reaction button to raise your hand. Okay,
Christina Johnson, you can ask your question.
Thank you. I actually don't have a question, but I just wanted to thank you guys for your time, and I really appreciate you doing this because it's so important.
Kristen, you can ask your question.
Hi, like the woman who spoke before, Dianne, I'm also in Texas, and is there anything, any support or anything someone can say to make me feel better about calling so much? And I just don't feel listened to. It's so frustrating, and I'm just looking for any tips.
could you ask your question again, please, Christian? I didn't understand you completely.
Yes, I live in Texas, and I don't feel my representatives, my senators represent me well. They are, I mean, Cruz stood up and was one of the main guys a year ago. Like I don't feel listened to, and it's very frustrating. I'm not sure what else to do. I was tempted to send a letter to the 99 or other people in the Senate to say, hey guys, we need HR 1 because my guy isn't going to do it for me.
Kristen, I feel you. I just tried to call Ted Cruz twice, couldn't get through. Voicemail was full. And so they wouldn't send me to John Cornyn. So I actually looked online and looked up his number and left him a message. I was able to get through to him. I think all we can do is just stay in their faces. And eventually somebody's going to have to listen, because, you know, I am hopeful that we're going to see another change in 2022, and hopefully it will be in a direction that we want it to be. So
thank you.
I will just offer up that, you know, I don't know how many of you have seen Cool Hand Luke, but you remember the line when he said, some men you just can't reach. Ted Cruz is a lost cause. Like, you know, you got so much love in your life and so much time, and you know, you're not going to persuade him. There are senators who are, you know, who are on the line and flippable, but the solution is you got to get rid of Ted Cruz. He's off the reservation. I mean, look, if you can if you can tell somebody that your wife is ugly and your father killed John Kennedy, and you still are going to bow down before him, like the, you lost it.
And I think my response would be, because I'm also a Texan living in Illinois, what I'm doing right now, actually, I've already joined Beto's campaign. And so I'm trying to join the campaigns that are going to be pushing at least a different governor. And hopefully, I know it's not responding to your question necessarily, but I think we have to work with what we have right now. And that is, it's looking pretty good beginning for Beto. So I would just say, check with the Texas Indivisible groups and really get involved there, because they have strategies that they're already putting in place for 2020 for this year. So I would say check with any Indivisible group, and then check with Beto's campaign, because they're looking for, like Suzanne said earlier, sending postcards, texting, whatever you can get, how you can get involved in that campaign.
Thank you.
I would also just make the point electorally, every cycle, if you are running against one of the real sort of rapscallions in the Republican Party, you're going to raise a ton of money and get a ton of attention, and it's probably a losing effort. You know, look at how much money we threw at Amy McGrath, and I've met Amy McGrath. She's a nice person, but like Mitch McConnell's not going to lose. And so I think as you think about sort of where you're going to weigh in electorally, the bright shiny object, wouldn't it be great to see Ted Cruz gone? Yeah, it would. But give me the choice between a Senate that has Ted Cruz in the minority and a Senate where the Republicans are in the majority and Ted Cruz isn't there, and I'll take door one every day of the week. Right?
I would speak, I think, about a different, perhaps additional path. I must admit that I find the realities that I hear reported on a daily basis alarming, depressing. I have to fight with myself to remain engaged and say, these are the acts that I believe are worth me taking because they represent my values and I believe they are worth taking. I don't know, and I'm trying not to think about the efficacy of the things that I do politically. I believe that these are things that I need to do because I want to invest in the democracy of this country. Period. And I find it personally and spiritually necessary for me to explore and act in ways that are reflective of the values of caring, respect, nurturing, challenging, that I can find, avenues that I can find that are not in the political realm. It is not for me to say, I want to abandon the political realm. I don't. I will do what I think is appropriate to do because I think it's appropriate to do. But my hope, if I have any, my inspiration, if I do, I believe will be from connecting with people personally in my neighborhoods, in different groups of discussion, and recognizing that I can feel that if I have a relationship, an interaction with someone that I'm able to speak with, to communicate with, to talk with, in a local group, in a communications group, online, in a local committee, wherever it happens, I find that those are the things that I feel that I need in order to have a sense of reality. Is dealing with people, connecting with people, talking with people. This is a group of 18 people. That's a viable place to speak and be heard. I need to find others and go looking for them, not under a political umbrella, but places where I can speak with, care about, listen to, understand, and support other people who believe in the worth and dignity of individual human beings. I don't do that because I think this is the political or structural way to push back against the system. I do it because I need to feel something more tangible, more personal, more viable, and more uplifting than I can make myself feel in the political arena currently. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, I think I
Go
was
ahead.
going to say, I think that what Mr. Dotson just said is profound, and it really does. It's the crux of everything. I was speaking with my students. I teach 7th grade, and we were talking in advisory about what does respect look like, feel like, sound like. And I started to tell them, because you have to plant the seeds in the next generation. And I said, you know what, we're going to have, some children said it looks like equality. And one child said, you know, I face prejudice because she's Muslim. And she said, people think they know about me, but they don't. And I told him, I said, we're going to have to learn to value people's character. See, you have to plant the seeds in the next generation. I said that we are going to have to learn that we can have discussions and disagreements and walk away and be okay. We're going to have to learn to problem solve together in spite of, I said, I told them character, this has nothing to do with race, gender, or orientation, but it has to do with how you treat one another. And I think we have to get back to that we are losing that. They are shutting discussion down. You know, I follow the laws in Texas and Tennessee and North Carolina because I'm a teacher, of what teachers can discuss. It is very serious in social studies where the teachers cannot discuss what happened with the insurrection. They cannot discuss whether or not in Texas, slavery deviates from the Constitution. That, you know, these are serious things. This threatens our democracy as well when you shut down discussion. So I think where I'm going is, what really bugs me, is really an issue with me, is we've got to pass the Voter Legislation Act, and not in the fall, not in the summer. It has to be this spring. I think if we do not pass it, we will lose democracy forever. The Democrats won't have a chance. And that's why when I see the legislation pass, that's why I'm energized to get people to call and to write letters. Because before I would tell Evelyn, I was like, I don't even feel like being involved anymore because all these laws are being passed and we can't do anything. But no, we've got to put the pressure on, because then we can mobilize people to protect democracy. But if we lose the right to vote, I just hate to see what will happen. So that's where, getting back to Chris, and I think that's where our focus is going to have to be. And we're just going to have to trust God for the rest. We're just going to have to focus on passing voter legislation. After that, I think everything else will fall into place, because when we work together, we win. We saw what happened. I live in Georgia. I didn't think we would ever turn this state blue. I gave up on my state. I was like, that's a redneck state. But to see that we turned it blue, people working together, to see that we sent 2 Democratic senators, was like, what? So I believe that once we get the legislation passed, people will be energized and people will believe in their own power. That's what I think. So that's where my focus is. We've got to get this legislation passed. We must.
Are there any additional questions for some of our panelists from today's group?
Can I ask a question of Representative Casten?
Absolutely.
You know what, where do we go, Representative, if, God forbid, that's why I said we have to fight for this, we lose the right to vote? They don't pass the voter legislation. They don't pass the voter legislation. The Democrats, where will we go if the Democrats get voted out? We're going to be looking at fascism, Marxism? That's just my, I shouldn't say fear, but my concern.
I think we are all deeply afraid that if we lose control of the House, if we lose control of all 3 branches, we do not have people advocating for democracy, and that's frightening. Now, at the same time, I got to offer you some optimism. If the majority of the American people supported this nonsense, January 6th wouldn't have happened, because the majority of the American people would have voted for those clowns, right? And so you got to take inspiration in the fundamental decency and character of the American people. If you lose that, you've lost everything. And as long as we stay engaged, as long as we stay active, as long as we vote, and insist on accountability, that's the way we get through this. I think Michael Dotson's point was I think deeply well taken. If you look at those moments in our history when we've had dark times in our history before. It's easy to think this time's the worst, but remember William McKinley was assassinated, and then Teddy Roosevelt got shot in short order. Woodrow Wilson was screaming "Birth of a Nation" in the White House. Those were some effed up times. Pardon my French. In that era in the late 1910s, late 1920s, we didn't fix that because all of a sudden we elected good people. We fixed that because a whole lot of people like Michael got together and formed community groups. We had the rise of the labor movement. We had, the NAACP, the women's temperance movement, the Kiwanis, the Rotarians, like all of these sort of civic organizations that came together. And that's always been like the fabric of America that really works. That's what this event is tonight, right? And I think we can take some inspiration from the fact when I was first running back in 2018, I had one of the local Chicago papers said to me, "Can you name 3 things?"
Oh no, he froze, or I froze.
Oh, there you go. You back? Sorry, I was frozen a little bit. The paper asked if I could say 3 positive things about Donald Trump, and I said, yeah. I said, number 1, I want to thank him for helping create the Me Too movement, because he mobilized a lot of people to be passionate about that. Number 2, I think he deserves credit for getting so many people activated and civically aware, because the Women's March and the March for Our Lives, all those people showing up, the rise of the Indivisibles, like that doesn't happen without him. And there isn't a 3rd thing. But I think you look at all of those groups that sprung up, we flipped the House, we got control, we checked Trump, we flipped the Senate because those groups got organized. And yes, some bad stuff happened because when those folks saw themselves losing power, they overreacted. But take confidence in the fact that we got to this point where we got them scared, not because of what people like me did. I mean, I ran for office, but because of what people like you did.
And I will also add too, this has just been from observation, being an indivisible leader and working, with our anti-racism group, but being in social media, this is what I noticed, and we have to change this. We sound just like them. And when we sound just like them, I believe we're internalizing what they're saying. But it causes us to become almost like paralyzed. We're not doing anything except checking tomorrow to see what they're saying. So then we can pass on what they're saying. And we've got to be very careful about that rhetoric. And we can't, I would have to go back to what Mr. Dobson said here too. We've got to get into those small groups because you know what? They're in their small groups every single day. How do you think all this stuff happened? Because they're talking. But what we're doing is talking about them. We kind of stop talking about them, and we've got to mobilize us into, if it's segments, to where we're talking about strategy that's going to really propel us into 2022, where we are right now. But you know what? We don't have the message. They are messengers. And all we're talking about is their message. What's our message? And until we get there, we're going to be stuck. And all we're going to be able to do is keep connecting their circle in our lives. We're going to break that cycle of their circle. And I think once we do that and start really getting together, just like Indivisible did in 2016, they started out with a very small group. And today we're over 5,000 groups throughout the nation. And it hasn't been that long, but all we're doing is, and I sound like, I'm a teacher, I sound like I'm fussing at you, but I'm not. But we've got to stop intaking all of that negative stuff. And they know we're intaking it. It's in the media, we see it, we listen to it. And then what do? We get on the phone, we call Sue, we call Betty, we call Bob. And then tomorrow we do the same thing. We have a group of people that we're talking to who want to hear all that stuff that's on the media. But what are we making phone calls? Are we sending postcards? Are we calling our senators every day, even though it's very tiring? I do. They know my name. They know I live in Crystal Lake. That's how important it is. We've got to remain active. We've got to be proactive and not reactive. We're too reactive to stuff. And so, yeah, like Sean was saying, that's why the algorithms on Facebook, they know who we are because we allow them, we play with the system. We got to stop playing with the system and strategize with people that are really ready to move forward and make a difference in saving our democracy.
And you know what, Evelyn, point well taken. I mean, you said a mouthful, point well taken. I was thinking strategy when you said that. I also thinking that maybe people are not as active on our side. One, because we're tired. I was listening to a newscaster talk about that. Someone was speaking about, I watch the news all the time, so I can't remember who went, but I know it's either CNN or MSNBC. People get tired of fighting. But I think that somehow, and this is to Kristen's point, or to Kristen as well, all of us, is we have to let people know what is at stake, because we might not realize what is at stake if we don't get voter legislation passed, and what we can do if we work together. So I think that has to be a strategy. If you don't really understand what's at stake, then you kind of like, well, I'll leave it to Mr. Casten and the rest of the representatives to solve this, because sometimes we do. I will be very honest, but I'm so glad I'm in this group. I was asked to speak. I was feeling, with everything I was watching in 2021, I kind of felt like, well, what's the point? It's out of our hands. It's out of our hands. It's Congress. Congress got to do something because we did everything we could down here. But Mr. Casten, or Representative Casten, reminded me tonight that no, it's still about all of us. It's still about all of us. So I think we have to message in piecemeal what's at stake and what we stand to hold on to and to gain by having voters, by calling our senators, giving them postcards, even Manchin. I don't understand Manchin. I think he's undercover, but I don't know. I think that's a strategy to continue to reach out, and I'm going to do that. Mail postcards. That's a strategy, because once we get that vote legislation passed, there's no stopping us.
Suzanne, I just want to give you a story just to give you a sign of how impactful this is. My sister has a good college friend who was on the staff of Randy Holtgren. You may know Randy Holtgren as the guy who Lauren Underwood beat in Illinois. And when all of the Parkland students started mobilizing after the Parkland shooting, he called her up and he said, we just lost. This was long before the election. She said, how come? And he said, because our whole thing is to sell fear. And we have convinced suburban white women that they need to be afraid of people in the inner cities and buy guns. And the Parkland students convinced suburban white women that they need to be afraid of people coming into their schools and shooting their kids. And we depend so much on NRA money that you have taken fear, you have taken our tool and turned it against us, and we're not going to get it back. And it was a prescient comment, and that was a group of passionate high school kids who created a movement, right? And I'm not saying that that's the same playbook every time, but that's why it happens. And I'll share another. And Evie J, you've probably heard this story, and I don't mean to keep emphasizing the racial points, but the fact is, so many of our great accomplishments in this country have had a racial tinge to them. When I was down just before COVID, I went down with John Lewis before he died and walked across the Selma Bridge with him one last time. And it was just an amazing moment. And, we're sitting there having breakfast every day with Ruby Bridges and Jim Lawson and Bernard Lafayette and all these people who were down there. And I was chatting with Chuck Neblett, who was one of the Freedom Singers one morning. And I said, all right, what was it about that moment in the 60s that gave the Martin Luther Kings and the Rosa Parks the courage to do things that got their parents lynched and worse? What gave them the courage to stand up and lead? And Chuck said, honestly, he's like, I got all the respect in the world for them, but it was Emmett Till that did it. and he said that all of his experience is that Emmett Till, or more specifically Mamie Till, created a movement, and once the movement was there, they needed to find a leader. But in his words, movements always come first. We don't tell our history that way, but it's one of these things that's rattled in my head. If you look around, who organized the Women's March? I don't know. Who organized all those Black Lives Matter marches? I don't know. But when it came time for someone to speak, there was someone standing at the front with a bullhorn, right? Movements come first. And it's folks like you guys, and it's stuff like Michael's talking about, to go and create those, it's that old, what was that old hair care commercial? And they told two friends, and they told two friends, and they told two friends. Right?
Yeah. And I think that, and I thank you for sharing that. I also think that we're talking about the racial hinge to this. I think one thing that's keeping the United States paralyzed from doing I want to say what we're going to do about the insurrection that happened so it won't happen again. I think that we have to refocus of who we think the enemy is. And anybody could correct me or ask me what I'm trying to say. I think that last year when it happened, I feel like America has always been preparing for some other to attack this great country. Other people who look like me, people who are Hispanic, who are Black, who are Muslim, to attack this country. Their minds have been so trained that we got to protect ourselves against the other. So when they saw the majority of white people, tearing up their own, descending on the Capitol, I think that created some type of a psychological block. What I'm saying is this, and I've said it to some of my white colleagues: And unfortunately, it did not happen with the last elections. I said, we've got to get beyond race because whiteness will destroy America. We have to get beyond, okay, well, just this racial issue and look at the bigger picture. We have to believe in the idea of democracy. That's what we have to believe in. I said, we need to save democracy, protect democracy. Then we can go back and talk about all this other stuff and iron it out. But we cannot let fear and race keep us from protecting a fragile democracy. I used to take this democracy for granted. I really did. I always think about what my mother said. She's no longer with us, but she would say to me, when I was younger, I was radical, and she said, this is the only country you have. This is the only country you know. And it never dawned on me until 9/11 happened that this country could be attacked. No, we can't be attacked, but we were attacked. It never dawned on me. And one of my colleagues said the same thing. She said, I never thought that we would be on the precipice of losing this democracy. And she's a friend, colleague, white lady, and Southern white lady. And she said, looking at the flag on her wall to me like 2 weeks ago, she said, I'm so afraid we're going to tear this country apart. She said, I told the students, I never thought we would be on the brink of losing this country. So I think that we have to not be paralyzed and stop looking at others, stop looking at blue states, red states. We have to save America. And that's really my focus. When Trump came into power, I remember saying to my husband, I said, I got to, and I didn't know how much my words would come into play. I said, I got to help save this country that my people built, because this man about to take this country. And that's how I got involved and really got involved with Move On and calling and texting. And we have, and this country is a great country, even though a lot of things happened that shouldn't have happened. But people across all races gave their blood, sweat, and tears to build this country, and we cannot lose it because somebody. And also, I think character. That's what I was telling my students. Character matters. It matters who we vote for. I said, I'm not talking about political party. I'm talking about character. We cannot overlook character, and I think that's what we did, and we underestimated Trump. We did, and so now we have to move beyond that. And know that character matters. I'll tell you a good book that I read, and you might have read it, Representative Casten. I suggest you, it's a good read. I finished it about 3 years ago, called How Democracies Die.
Yeah, I read it.
Yes, isn't it awesome?
Yeah.
And they said in the end of the book, they said one way we could save democracy, and that's what happened, I think, in 2020, is that people work together. People work together. I was telling people down here in Georgia, it was not only Black people that got up and voted to help save the situation. White people got up and voted too. I mean, in mass numbers down here were voting Democrat. So what I'm saying is, going forward, like I share with people, we have to put our differences aside because we have so much more to lose, But yes, that's the awesome book, How Democracies Die. And I think you'll agree with me that they underestimated Trump, because like they underestimated Hitler, they underestimated Mussolini.
Yeah, no, it's always fragile, and thank you for doing it. Back in my corporate days, I had a colleague and a mentor who, this is going to sound like it's totally off topic, but he told me once that there's only one human resources problem in any company, and you can't solve it. And the human resources problem is that everybody on this planet has a gap between who they are and who they think they are, and you can't talk about people's gap. And in his characterization, that the narrower the gap, the happier the life. But good, kind people don't tell people about their gaps. You don't tell somebody like, I know you went to law school and you want to be a lawyer, but you should be a teacher. You just made bad choices. You only did that because that was what your dad wanted you to do, right? We all know that person in our life, right? And, the stories we tell ourselves about our country, there's some gaps between who we are and who we think we are, right? We will be a happier and more robust country if we narrow that gap, just like you're a happier person if you narrow that gap. But it's painful to acknowledge that there's a gap. I mean, that's this whole conversation about critical race theory, right? That we might actually acknowledge that, just like when I was studying biology, every year I had to buy a new textbook because we learn new things. We learn new things in our history books too, don't we? Yes. But to change those means we've got to acknowledge that there's some gaps in there, and it's healthy to go through, but growth is painful, and we're growing.
Monica, did you have a question earlier? You're not muted, but your volume's not up. We have a couple of minutes while Monica's waiting too. Jaden, you want to take that part? And I'll talk a little bit about the voter registration if you'll do the call to action, at least the next step from Congressman Casten and maybe Suzanne also.
Yes, so our call to action. So we're asking that you take responsibility to do within your power. Make sure that your friends, their friends, and their friends are registered to vote. So of course we have, and also ensure that all their information is up to date so they can vote. So you can, there's a link that we have here and it's voteamerica.com/voter registration. That's a website that you can use to verify all that information and make sure that everyone's set to vote, because a democracy only works when all of us are involved. So be sure to use that link.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be Sean, but if you'd like to have a last word, give us a word of encouragement, or anyone else, that would be great.
I'll just chop in just to say thank you, mostly because I have a hard stop here in about a minute. So thank you as always, Evie J, for all that you do. Thank you to everybody. This has really just been fascinating stories, and it keeps me encouraged. Like I think we all have the same fear that people might be demoralized right now, because it's hard. We busted our butt to flip the House, then we busted our butt to flip the Senate and the White House, and now we're sitting there saying, I want everything to be fixed. It takes time to build things, but don't lose sight of how much progress we made, because people got up and don't stop working. So thank you all so much. Pleasure to see you. And with that, I'm going to hop off.
Thank you so much. All righty.
Thank you so much.
Thank
All
you.
right,